Hi all, I have an absolutely amazing and intriguing game to show you today. Leela playing against Stockfish, so Leela 11089 against Stockfish, development version 22nd of August 2018. So this is in the rapid rumble, 15 minutes with 5-second increments, bonus game section, and it's an odds game, so the white pawn on f2 will be missing. It will be missing, but thankfully for Leela, the way she's been trained, she actually needs to be led to the position, because apparently it's just terrible if she has to start from a particular position. So thankfully, Leela is led to this start position with the odds of the f pawn via the bird's opening, f4, knight h6, which is actually a name, by the way, horsefly defense. So f5, which gives up the f pawn, and now the pieces are reset. So we go to move 5 when the game really starts here. So it's really to get to this position with odds of f pawn. So echoes of the romantic era of chess. If you remember the Paul Morphy games, he used to give odds of pieces and pawns, sometimes whole rook, knight even, and still win sometimes. So anyway, the game starts here. Leela chooses e4. Now on the very first move here, Stockfish, in my view, overthinks things and plays e6, in my view. Because prior to this game in the tournament, Leela had lost to two engines, which both played just the classical response, e5, which has got an absolutely great benefit of it, marking d4, stopping d4 basically, and so bishop c5 later, which really cast doubt on the downsides of this gambit with the missing f-pawn, because that diagonal has been compromised. The way Stockfish has played this seems to have been, it's different to the other engines for sure, to play e6, but maybe it's overthought, it's overcooked all of its variations to actually come up with this. And I'll show you why. So knight c3 was played, which is already a bit of a surprise perhaps to Stockfish, thinking maybe knight f3 is important, and then d5, for example, ed. But no, we have knight c3, d5, and now d4 here. In this position, this missing f-pawn could actually turn out to be very advantageous to white if black really messes this up. Bishop b4 is played. On d takes e4, this position is interesting. It's an interesting compensation position with the missing f-pawn, because you'll note that the diagonal is not such a liability here. White can actually try and castle, and the default rook on f1 is going to be given great scope and activity, and it's going to be an attacking position, like some sort of gambit. Now, black could try and undermine the center, but, for example, this variation, black has got an edge. However, we have actually bishop b4. Stockfish has got another idea, which again I think is a result of overthinking it a little bit. So bishop b4, e5, and this is the continuation maybe Stockfish initially thought was entirely absurd, because it allows queen h4 check. And you'll note with the knight pinned that g3 would seem impossible, and in fact Stockfish was assuming king e2 here. So that was the assumption of playing this whole queen h4 check. And you may have had games yourself where the opponent plays some weird and wonderful opening, and you've relied on your analysis, and as a result of playing what you think is really good to try and refute a weird opening, you've ended up violating basic fundamental opening principles. And it turns out this could actually be already a total violation of opening principles in a way. You could argue that, because Leela just plays g3 here, just inviting queen e4 check. So yes, I mean, I've tested this on my machine. Originally it was going to play e5 and then switch to e6 with this whole tactical idea, lured in like a magnet to this whole idea of queen h4, this excursion. On king e2, yeah, sure, king e2 is going to be very good for black. It's not a great move, and that was actually what it was expecting. But we have g3, and now the queen actually goes back. Stockfish actually basically changes its mind, so it has moved a piece twice. Instead of being a massive downside of a missing f-pawn because of this weakened diagonal, we have a really aggressive version of the French defense winnower, basically, with this missing f-pawn. It's very, very dangerous for black already. Let's have a look at queen e4 check. So king f2, queen takes. There's a move here which seems to be super strong, which maybe was underestimated. And that move is h3 here. It doesn't seem to matter what black does. Black ends up getting a big disadvantage here. So the queen is kind of in Siberia a little bit here, and there's no other pieces developed apart from the bishop. If we look at these variations, and you might want to check the pinned comment of this video as well to follow this through, but I'll give you some of it now. So bishop takes, say, which gets that e4 square for the queen available, but knight f6 is apparently the best move here. Because if we look at this, if queen e4 here, then bishop d3 and the queen is trapped. So knight f6, now e takes, and now queen e4, and here the queen could actually threaten to go back to h1. So knight f3 to be able to play bishop d3, trapping the queen now, is the big threat. So not bishop d3 here, because the queen actually could return back. So knight f3 sets the trap for the queen. Now here, if g takes, then bishop d3, thanks very much, winning the queen. So let's go with queen f5. Now f takes g7. It turns out this form pawn here is very, very good for white after bishop h6. Let's follow this through, knight c6. Yeah, this is all variations. If queen h5 here, queen d2, for example, f5, rook e1, knight c6, queen f4, with idea of g4, is advantageous for white. This gets to be a massive position for white. This position, winning the h7 pawn as well, threatening knight f6 and things. Massive position. So let's carry on with knight c6 here, not queen h5. g4, g5, queen c1, and this turns out to be a massive advantage. I'll just demonstrate why. Because basically f6, knight e5 to g4 to f6, for example. So say bishop d3 here, this is the strongest to be able to snap off the knight and then get into the dark squares of f6. So for example here, takes, and now you might think, well, there's no knight e4 to g4 to f6, but there is knight e5 to d3 to f4 to h5 to f6. So for example here, this is just winning for white, absolutely winning this position when it's achieved, totally winning, big advantage. So yeah, black's been totally compromised here in this line, in this particular line. If we look at move 9, g3, so instead of queen d8, yeah, we're looking again at now bishop takes c3. This version of events is the same. It's just transposing a little bit, except let's look at queen g6 though. Here, queen g6, there's knight h4, and then the queen's trapped there because we're covering h5 and h6. And if we look at h6, then bishop d3, trapping the queen. Queen f5, there's actually g4 here, and then this is going to be horrible. For example here, I believe there's actually knight h4, which is going to be trapping the queen. Because bishop d3, there might be f5 and an escape route. So knight h4 taking some squares, and then bishop g2, trapping the queen. So it seems the queen's trapped, or horrible other things happen in these lines. So it's been overcooked. It's a paradox, but with greater thinking, greater analysis than the other classical engines, has actually resulted in a fundamental violation of opening principles with the queen moving twice. But what's accentuated this to make this even worse, this overcalculation, is the f-file is super dangerous. Any attacking player would like this position because the centre is not that wobbly here. White might be able to have the cake and eat it, so to speak. So we have a3 wanting even to get the bishop pair. And now bishop f8. Undeveloping, yes. And you might wonder, well, bishop takes c3. Now, Fischer had a plan against the winner with a4 and bishop a3 a lot of the time. But here actually, with this missing f-pawn, we can do quite well with knight h3, it seems. For example, this might be the most appropriate way to play things. Bishop d3. C takes knight g5. And you can see the f-file pain emerging. And all of these lines now are pretty good. They're pretty crushing for white. For example, like this is absolutely crushing. After knight h3, yeah, if you're just wondering about this. Let's have a look at this again, because you might be convinced on your machine, this, when you check this out, that why not, this. But yeah, knight h3, in all my analysis, is actually stronger than queen g4. So let's go with just knight h3. You can check out queen g4, as I say, in the pinned comment. So knight h3. So I mentioned c5. If black castles into it, that's a lot of fun. Bishop d3, knight f5. And this position with g4, bishop takes, check, queen d3. It's really quite crushing, these lines. They're absolutely murderous to black. Big advantage there. So yeah, the bishop takes c3 lines don't seem that appealing to black. Let's just recap again on knight h3, c5, bishop d3, knight b6. This one. Now here you might think knight takes e5 as an alternative. Doesn't that parry f7? Queen h5. This is all very good for white as well with queen h6. It's just so dangerous. This f-file here. Queen g7, queen takes. Look at the f-file now. This is totally justified because of this f-file. That's like winning the rook on g8 if nothing else. Yep. So, yeah, there's a lot of lines which just seem to be in white's favour on taking on c3. So we have this other weird move. So now, in a sense, this isn't usually, if it's French defence proper without the missing f-pawn, such an undeveloping move has been seen before. It's not totally at this world. I think Trojan has won some games with this system, with bishop going back to f8 and some others, because it's usually pretty closed, but here it's not so closed. So bishop e3, knight e7, already white's got a fantastic position. Bishop e3 actually prevents c5. Yeah, white could actually take on c5 without penalty, it seems. So knight e7, knight f3, knight f5. And now Leela doesn't mind the exchange of the dark squared bishops, funny enough, weakening black on the dark squares a bit. Queen d7 here probably doesn't help because of g4. This looks nice for white anyway. There's an option of g4. So bishop e7. Leela takes, knight takes, bishop d3. So look how many pieces white's got out and about. And a default rook on f1 because of the missing f-pawn. Fantastic upside all of a sudden. So the funny thing is, this really didn't happen to the other two engines, which actually beat Leela because of this weird gambit. But no, Stockfish, for its immense calculation, the paradox of less is more actually became true. If it had done less analysis and played more classically in the opening, white wouldn't be having this luxury position. it's luxury on both sides of the board. Luxury f-file, luxury clamping now with b4, which you might think, why is b4 significant? Actually, this has a significance for the c8 bishop later, because any attempt at c5, white can get a structure with a4 and b5 pawns against the bishop in endgames here. So interesting idea, b4. It's not just what it seems about c5, it's about endgames potentially as well. It's pretty deep, b4. Now, white could have also castled, it seems. Say this position, there's great compensation, even allowing black a standard French defense plan of exchanging off the light square bishops. This position is advantageous to white as well, a small edge. But anyway, b4, b6, both sides castle. On bishop a6 here, you might think, just b5, that's another perk, just to stop that strategic bishop exchange. Because usually, yeah, black would, in the French defense, would want to exchange off the bad bishop. So, yeah, b4's got a lot of perks, both middle game and end game. That duality of concepts, like the form pawn, middle game and end game, and here, middle game, end game, is Leela all round. It's totally like holistic play out of this world. So anyway, both sides castle. We have knight e2, c6 being played here. There is a tactical line, by the way, you might be interested in checking out, which is c5 here, allowing the bishop for c4, allowing the bishop to be taken because of c4, but c3 is refuting the whole concept, just sacking the b pawn, believe it or not, because this isn't very nice for black, this position. So keeping this super aggressive bishop and switching the rook, this is just going to be crushing. This is a crushing position for white. Look at the f-file, look at the rooks, look at f5. It's just murderous. So even that wonderful looking tactic of bishop a6 here just doesn't work. b5, c5 doesn't work. So anyway, c6, a4, c5, now c3, knight bc6. On c4 here, we have the bishop is a wonderful attacking weapon here. With this semi-open f-file, it's just an attacking player's dream, this position, because look at how white can just use that wedge in the center to really intensify threatening mate here. The pressure, knight h5, it just crashes through these variations to black's king, white getting a massive advantage. And here, if also even stronger, or no, also is strong queen d2 here, don't even have to take that knight. This is also pretty crushing stuff. Yeah, it's really big advantage for white there as well. So all these lines with c4 are pretty hopeless, as you might expect. Knight bc6, queen d2, luxury attacking position. Rook a e1, rook ac8, b5, setting out the endgames to say that this bishop will be miserable. Knight a5, knight f4. The center is so stable here. C takes, queen c7. Usually in the French defense there's a bit of pressure on d4, but here it's just not the case. Rook c1 was played. Actually, I'll just show you something else here instead of queen c7. Rook c4. If this is taken, then sure, black could have a good position based on this bishop coming alive, based on d5. For example, bishop takes. Let's just take this for the sake of argument. It gives black, counterplay. Yeah, that bishop comes alive, the diagonal comes alive. Black should be, it should be just an even position. White can try and force a perpetual check, though. It's not the end of the world. White forces a perpetual check, but this is totally unnecessary to liberate black. White would just play bishop b1 here. For example, a6, queen d3, threatening mate on h7. This is just crushing as usual, back to business, in the business of crushing kings here. So rook f2, g4, g5, g takes, and slaughtering on the king side, basically. Yep. will happen. This is just massive for white. It's absolutely massive position. So yeah, rook c4, you might think it can be ignored basically. So queen c7 was played with the idea maybe of queen c3. Now that wasn't ignored with rook c1, it was addressed. But it seems as though the position is strong enough for white to even be able to play knight h5, inviting this. It seems, for example, queen e2, this position, even with d4 dropping, is still really good for white. For example, like this, shows the strength of white's attack, threatening mate with the pawn pawn. Thanks very much. And this is crushing. So even if c3 is allowed, it's winning. But c3 wasn't allowed, you know, the use of c3. And now rook takes, queen takes, knight h5, going in for the kill, it seems. Knight c4, trying to distract the queen away from this diagonal. Queen f4, knight g6. If rook e8 here, by the way, then bang, knight takes g7. For example, knight f5. Let's have a look at knight f5 first. This is just winning for white. And if that's taken, then check, and knight g5 is a standard mate pattern coming up. Yeah, it's all mating there. Okay, so let's have a look at it again. So knight g6. If here, by the way, if knight f5, then so g4, knight e7, taking here, check. This is just devastating. E takes. Also devastating. White's crushing. So anyway, knight g6 here, knight f6 check, and king h8 was played. The reason, if g takes, queen takes, this is murderous. After f takes, for example, knight g5, black's just getting mated basically. And if knight here, if knight sack to try and distract things, again it's pretty hopeless. So one check, but white's attack carries on very nicely here. For example, like this, big advantage to white. So king h8, yeah, this is a massive attack. The queen drops back, and it looks as though for a moment, hold on a sec, is black being really annoying here with the c-file? Stockfish annoying Leela's attack. So knight c4, queen c1, knight a5 again. But here, there's a key move. If, by the way, knight e7, then g4 to stop the use of that f5 square. This is strong. For example, like this, queen a3 here is another big idea of the queen coming to c1. This diagonal is lethal. For example, here, take the rook. This is just winning for white. And what else? If knight g8, just take on d7, and the rook's hanging on f8. So that's another idea of bouncing via c1. So it's not totally without venom, this queen c1. So we have actually on queen c1, knight a5, we have actually bishop takes g6 here. Now if fg, there's a beautiful line with knight h4. Queen takes, knight takes g6, checkmate. Take that, Stockfish. Ouch. And of course, if g takes, the queen is usually on c1, yeah? Queen takes h6, and then queen h7, checkmate. So, we have queen takes c1 being played, with two pieces hanging there to be taken. Which one? But it's all in white's favour. The knight's taken. If the bishop's taken, then knight takes d7 isn't very clever. Big advantage for white. So, you know, rook d8, rook c7, no problem. So it has to take the knight, and the bishop hangs around looking at f7 here. This is probably the strongest. Bishop d3 is also possible in this position. For example, here, rook c7, the infiltration to c7 should be in white's favour as well. But bishop h5, more incisive perhaps. Knight c4 is played. On f takes, this is just miserable, as you'd expect. Knight takes e5, and this looks diabolical. Here, knight check, and then white's got a massive advantage here. So knight c4 was played, blocking that c-file, blocking the infiltration. However, form pawn has arrived. Now the duality of the form pawn, it's not just middle game for the goal hanger, for checkmating, which is very nice. And Tom Videos, when I asked him about form pawns the other day, said he prefers, the middle game aspects. But here, we've also got now a potential endgame aspect of really cutting that king out, of getting into the game. The king's meant to be a fighting piece in the endgame. And can the form pawn do something here in relation to the king's activity? Knight e5 blasting away through that c-file. So now black has to stop rook c8 and trades rooks. But this endgame is total luxury for white. Bishop e2 because of the form pawn. And if you look, amusingly, any entrances to white's position are cut off here because of this structure. The pawn cuts off d6 and this pawn cuts off c6. So imagine the king. How does it actually go and attack white? It can't. And in fact, d4 is played, a rather desperate looking move. Which is of course a total liability in its own right, losing a pawn. But what does black do here? If black doesn't do that, say bishop b7, look at this nightmare endgame. Bishop f3, pinning the pawn. And the white king comes up, but the black king can also be prevented on this side of the board from entering. Because if king g5 here, then just king g3 with h4 support. So for example, this back king back, g5, and the h5 pawn's a liability. The king can't really go to here because of h5 dropping. And then the bishop comes in, and it's going to be like mating if black doesn't step back now. So if the king steps back, then h5 drops. So white's clearly winning this position. So it's diabolical, this endgame. So the pawn was given up, d4. So bishop f3, the pawn can be rounded up. In fact, I remember a Karpov-Kasparov match where it was decided on a weak pawn in an endgame just being rounded up. Here it seems analogous. h5, if we try to work with the king here, bishop c6 even, and actually not only the bishop's dominated, but the king's dominated. This is just embarrassing. It's just totally embarrassing. The king just comes and takes d4. On king h7, just check puts the king back in its box as well, and the king comes and rounds up this pawn, for example, very comfortably, and can stop king e8 if sadistic. And a5 actually wins like quite quickly with a pass pawn over there anyway. So after the formality, the forms have been signed over here, and then b7. Okay, so basically, yes, desperate move d4 in a lost position. Bishop f3, h5. So yeah, any king f8, there's bishop c6, as mentioned. So h5, offering two pawns now. Offering a pawn there now, but this pawn is like long term to be taken. So anyway, that pawn is taken, bishop b7, king f2, so this other pawn can be potentially rounded up. We have now bishop e4, which gives the idea, hang on, isn't this pawn potentially vulnerable? On a4, we have king e1, which supports the idea actually of bishop d1. So if bishop c2, we can imagine bishop d1. d3, if bishop b7, then this pawn's just going to be rounded up, king d2. Bishop d1 will make way for the king to come to d3, for example, well, eventually, or just use the pawns over there, either, like using the pawns over here, and this is actually a crushing idea, with g6 potentially, because of e6 issues. So anyway, d3 was played, king d2, king f8, king e3, bishop h7, bishop d1, and now look, this pawn could just be rounded up potentially, bishop b3 to c4 for example. Here, king e8, g4, now king d2 was played, king e8, king e3, yeah, Leela's been a bit of a sadist again. with these moves. Bit of a sadist. Yeah, gets on with pushing some pawns now. Yeah, the black king's being shut out of the game with these 2 pawns. So Leela's doing something, trying out some stuff. Okay. And now bishop b3, as though, bishop c4's on the cards now finally to take this pawn off. Relieve the stockfish suffering. So that pawn drops. Yes, it's 2 pawns up now. Yep, the pawns are pretty winning. And the game carries on for quite a bit, though. Let's have a look. So that, Leela's safeguarding the a4 pawn. Most of the pawns are on, I say most. Actually, there's an equal number of pawns on light and dark squares. So, at the moment. So, the game carries on a bit. And then Leela finally finds a winning plan after bishop g4 with ideas of g6. And then puts that on hold for a bit, comes back to it, looks at it from a few more angles, then comes back to it eventually, I assure you. So bishop g4, coming back to it, okay, and now finally, g6, following up on it, finally, g6. Okay, now, if king f8, then g7 is pretty good. So we have f takes, and this is also pretty good. This is totally winning this endgame, as you might expect. No table bases are going to save stockfish in this game. No draw in this game. So desperate a6 there. So white's queening, and it plays on to the death under the rules of the competition. So how does stockfish actually get mated? With 2 queens on the board. Queen f8, queening, f8 queen, checkmate. If this was an over the board game, by the way, remember that when you queen a pawn, you've got to put a queen on. You can't put an upside down rook, otherwise you could lose the game. There are rules of over the board chess. Make sure you've got a queen available. If necessary, stop the clocks, get queen from somewhere, put it on the board. Anyway, this is not over the board, but Leela queens with checkmate here. So stockfish in the main tournament didn't lose a single game. So when stockfish loses, it's newsworthy. But stockfish also lost, it seems, in this game with a Morphy style gambit with white's f pawn missing. So basically, an old ID of Leela 11089 gave stockfish f pawn odds and won. And yes, stockfish fans everywhere are trying to investigate this game. I believe what's happened is an overcalculation occurred, which led to controversial territory, where the missing f-pawn turned into an advantage. When the other engines, 2 other engines, had beaten Leela in this line with e5 instead of e6, playing more classically, not violating opening principles, questioning white's principled opening play, they did much better. So it's an amusing paradox of sometimes less calculation is more, or more principled play. Sometimes you can, in human chess, we say that sometimes we can lose by our own calculation. Sometimes simple chess, less is more, is often a very powerful paradox to bear in mind. Maybe that's one lesson from this game about, especially the opening. Don't be too clever to try and refute dodgy openings. I've had that myself recently, where I didn't even manage to castle, trying to be too precise against an unusual gambit in one of my blitz streams recently. But anyway, so I thought this was a very, very newsworthy game. And also, I would like to add, it seems Leela was put on not 4 cards, but down to 2, and that might have actually been an advantage. So again, the case of less is more, actually. So 2 graphics cards instead of 4, it seems, and Leela's calculation speed has actually gone up. So it's what actually is the end result. Have a look at your end results at what you do, and sometimes these paradoxes, and that's the beauty of life, these wonderful paradoxes can come true. So in this opening, thankfully for Leela, this French defense line just made it really nice for white. Luxury attacking position for Leela. compared to the other two she had against the other engines. So anyway, comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Is this the end of the era for classical chess engines approaching? What do you think? Thanks very much.